back to another episode of 2 on OSU. I'm Sam Hutchins. Ben Hutchins joins me from Stillwater, where we're talking Oklahoma State football all year long. And we have a third guy on the podcast today, Eli Lederman. Maybe you know him from the Lederman Jacket podcast or his work on Sellout Crowd covering Oklahoma. Maybe you know him from his indoor soccer prowess, too. He's built up a reputation there. But he does great work, so be sure to check out all his stuff. That's a recommendation anyway, before he hops on the podcast. But we're doing something pretty fun today for Bedlam Week that we'll get into right after we thank the sponsors of the show, all of who we really do appreciate. I mean, Mid-First Bank, been great to us, Laserlight Skin Clinic, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Oklahoma Ford Dealers, Fire Lake Casino. Thanks to those sponsors for supporting the show. And remember, drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Ben, thanks for joining me. Eli, special guest, welcome onto the podcast. Let's talk about what we're doing today.
All right. Do you have the chime handy, or do I need to say it for the draft? You know,
Make your best sound. Make your best sound.
Do 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 do.
Well done.
We're doing a little bit of a draft here. It's not quite a fantasy football draft, not quite an NFL draft. It's a Bedlam players draft. We're not talking about positions. We're not talking about most important. Guys, we're just drafting the best players in Bedlam. There's going to be 3 teams of 4 players. We all pick. Eli, just because you cover the Sooners doesn't mean you need to pick all Sooners. Same goes for us. We're just going to try and get the best players from Bedlam on our teams. I don't know. We haven't thought about some stakes or a little prize for the winner. Maybe we can discuss that based on the box score after the game. But Eli, you have the honor of being our guest. We'll let you pick first with your best Bedlam player.
Well, I'm honored to be making my 2 on OSU debut, and I'm honored to have the first overall pick here. So I won't. I'll quit clearing my throat. I think the answer has to be Ollie Gordon with the first overall pick. There's nobody hotter in college football right now running the football, it doesn't seem. And if from an OU perspective this week, he's the guy they got to figure out how to stop. Brent Venables gushed over him in his weekly presser. It's clearly been the emphasis. And I think when you look at Oklahoma State and the offense, it's if you can contain Ollie Gordon and make Alan Bowman beat you, that's the start to an Oklahoma win in Stillwater. But no one's really proven to be able to stop Ollie Gordon of late. So he's my first pick. He's the guy I need on my team.
I'll take him off my list. I do not have to go very far. Good pick, Eli. You've covered Oklahoma State and OU. You really know your way around both these teams. So you'll be formidable. Now, how have the Sooners done against some of the other top backs in the Big 12, Eli? Is there any sort of comparison that we have going in, what to expect from Gordon?
They haven't seen a guy like Ollie Gordon. Perhaps Brent Venables himself said it. There isn't another guy like Ollie Gordon in the conference or maybe the country. But OU enters this game having given up 3 straight 100-plus yard rushing performances. So alarm bells should be going off in Norman, and they have been a little bit. But Jonathan Brooks, Texas, 129 yards against the Sooners at the Cotton Bowl. R.J. Harvey, UCF, got over 100 yards on him. And then Devin Neal was a big part of the rushing performance for Kansas. The Jayhawks ran for 225 yards on the Sooners. And so they've struggled lately. And so that's going to be a big emphasis this week. Ollie Gordon obviously is what's going to be at the point of attack. They've got to figure out how to stop him if they're going to get this last Bedlam win up in Stillwater.
Ben, you're my younger brother. You can go next.
Hold on. By how many minutes? By how many minutes are we talking here?
It's 2 minutes, Eli. 2 minutes that have kind of been a negative for most of my life, but are now becoming more and more of a positive as we get older, being the younger brother. So another benefit here with taking the second overall pick, I'm going to make it Nick Martin, the Cowboy linebacker. Gosh, he has bursted onto the scene. I don't think like anybody would have expected at the beginning of this year with no Justin Wright. Nick Martin has really taken over. And guys, he's averaging more than 10 tackles a game. Those are better than Malcolm Rodriguez numbers at this point in the season. in 2021. So I'm going to ride with Nick Martin. I think Brent Venables and Mike Gundy, they talked a lot about get OU's offense getting the ball side to side. So I think the linebackers are going to have to be big time getting out to the sides, the perimeters, and stopping that OU attack. So I'm going to take Nick Martin with the second overall pick.
You know, guys, it's interesting. I look at my big board now, and I guess Oklahoma State does have an argument as having maybe the top two players in this game. You know, Nick Martin and Ollie Gordon being big contributors to that argument. I think OU's the deeper team overall, and maybe a lot of that is just recruiting rankings over the years. OU has some good players, but the first two guys off the board are Cowboys. I'm going to change that. I'll go Dylan Gabriel. He's won a Bedlam game, and obviously we're not taking really past into consideration for this. This is all about who we think is going to be great on Saturday. But I like to take Dylan Gabriel. I think he'll have a good game, and I think Bedlam will be a close game. And what did Dylan Gabriel do in his other big close game against a rivalry? He led the game-winning drive. So I think Dylan Gabriel will do well. He played well enough against the Cowboys last year, especially in the first quarter. Not so much beyond that, but he's played well against the Cowboys, and he already has a Bedlam win. Give me Dylan Gabriel.
I think that's a good pick. I think it's a big week for Dylan Gabriel and the OU offense. Like, all eyes in Norman, and it's obviously a huge game, are going to be on Jeff Lebby, offensive coordinator, and then what Dylan Gabriel does in this offense, because the last 2 weeks have not been what Oklahoma fans have come to expect from their offenses, from their Jeff Lebby offenses. And what was a quiet noise after the UCF game with how they struggled got really loud after Kansas. They threw the ball 19 times, hardly threw it downfield. Weather was a bit of a factor, but that didn't stop Kansas with their backup quarterback, Jason Bean, from throwing something like 32 times. So there really was no excuse for it, and it was a glaring hole in the Sooners game in their first loss of the season. So this week, obviously it's big. The game's important, but for Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel, those two, they've got to figure out the passing game. So I think it's going to be an emphasis, and it's either going to be the reason we're talking here Monday or Sunday about an OU win, or it's going to be the first thing we look at in an OU loss, I think.
Is Dylan Gabriel, where's that Heisman campaign at? Because he was a legitimate contender. Is it over now, or does he still have a shot?
I think he's still got a shot, but it's got to start with some, not just wins, but big performances. I mean, just like OU's playoff hopes, his Heisman candidacy probably hinges on them running the table, winning the Big 12 title game, maybe even reaching the playoff. That's in its own right pretty far-fetched. The Heisman campaign is probably in similar air now. Far-fetched, but not out the window. Again, very striking that Kansas with Jason Bean had confidence throwing the ball late, and that Oklahoma with the guy who has been their biggest catalyst this year, the guy who might be a Heisman candidate still, ran the ball late in that game when they needed to ice it. Remains a complete debacle for Jeff Lebby and the Sooners.
I like that pick, Eli, because running quarterbacks have hurt OSU at times this season. That's going to be something to watch. So in my pick in the second round, guys, I'm going to go with Brennan Presley.
Hold up. Eli hasn't picked yet.
I was going to ask, is it a snake draft or what? You threw me, man.
That's bad manners. No snake, right? Well, I think
no snake. I think
I was just a little long-winded and I messed up everyone's flow. But yeah,
no,
Eli,
Ben,
unless you just worked out a draft
eager.
day trade behind my back.
Yeah, I'm getting his press box meal, so I'll get two, and he can have this pick. Now, with mine, fourth overall pick, it's got to be Danny Stutsman. We'll see where he's at health-wise this weekend, but when at full strength, him and Nicholas Martin, that's quite a linebacker battle, but he's got an argument against Nicholas Martin to be the best linebacker in this game. I think that's going to be a really fun thing to watch. He led the Big 12 in tackles a year ago. He's on pace to potentially do the same again. Nick Martin is probably his best rival to get there. And fact is, it's going to come down to his health. He picked up an ankle injury in Lawrence, missed most of the second half as a result of it. Sounding confident this week from Brent Venables and even Danny himself, but I don't think we're really going to know until we get started Saturday. And that is such an important deal when you consider how important he is to the defense for OU, how important he is to stopping the run with Ollie Gordon. Danny Stutsman is probably one of those. He is most weeks, but this week in particular, given who they're playing and his status with the ankle, he's probably the most important guy on the field on defense. And that's why he's my pick, and it's why he'll be someone we'll be watching very early on, I think.
I know I had heard kind of, and I know Stutsman didn't play against Kansas, but it was freezing cold there, and was it OU trying to warm up with no shirts on? I mean that's the mentality of a defensive unit. I feel like he's going to get everything he can to get out there and play.
Indeed, he's kind of the emotional leader. I don't know if he was the leader in the attempt to warm up shirtless. They got shut down by security, I guess. But he is very much so the emotional leader of this defense, of this team. There's no debating that when Danny Stutsman is going, this defense is going. And it's sort of been, the part of the tide the last couple of weeks. He missed most of the second half against Kansas, struggled a bit early in that game, struggled a bit against UCF. And in turn, the OU defense has struggled as well.
Gotcha. Okay, it is my pick now. Sorry. I'm going to take Brennan Presley. And it's because he's been utilized so much more these last few weeks. Sam, I know he had that touchdown on the handoff last week. It's really felt like OSU and Casey Dunn has kind of unlocked Brennan Presley, who has always shown up in these big games, right? Remember his kickoff return in Bedlam a couple years ago that really changed that game, and some of the bowl games he's played in. Brennan Presley's an Oklahoma guy. He gets this rivalry. He said selfishly he's super excited he gets to play in the last Bedlam. I don't think an opportunity like this is going to slip by Brennan Presley without having some sort of big moment. So I'm going to take BP.
Yeah, I can see that. And I'll draft with my last pick of the second round. I'll go Colin Oliver. From the Cowboy linebacker. He's playing linebacker this year, and he's a teammate of Trace Ford, who high school teammate of Trace Ford. That's an interesting dynamic there. But Oliver, while maybe Nick Martin has kind of become the shining star there, Colin Oliver's still been pretty dang good. And Brian Nardo said that he's worked at unlocking Colin Oliver, and when Colin Oliver's been unlocked, when he's been unleashed, he's been really good. So he's a big-time player. He was the guy who had that sack, I know both you guys remember, on Caleb Williams to end the last time the Cowboys won Bedlam. So I'll take Colin Oliver.
I like it. You guys have taken 2 stars from the last Bedlam game in Stillwater. We were all there that night. I'm going to pick a guy I think could be a star, could play a real big role in this year's game, and that's Kendall Daniels. As I mentioned with Dylan Gabriel and Jeff Levy, the passing game is going to be so important here. And if there's anyone who can really disrupt that and play a role in that, I think Kendall Daniels is up there. I know Cameron Epps, who maybe he'll get picked later, is another guy who could get into that space. But to me, there's like a pressure point for the OSU defense to hit this week. It is to find a way to disrupt that early offensive rhythm. And that's where you talk about turnovers. It's where you talk about making plays in the secondary. Kendall Daniels, I think, could be that guy to make things tough on the Sooners. And I do feel like after watching last week, it seems to me they're very hot and cold. If they start well, they're going to play well. If they don't, they might struggle to get that rhythm going. So that's where I turn to with pick number 3.
Yeah, can't go wrong with that guy for sure. I'm gonna now, if you're part of the OSU audience here, turn off your ears, close it down, because I'm gonna pick Drake Stoops, the guy who, of course, has haunted the Cowboys in quite a few Bedlam games now. And maybe this isn't as much of Drake Stoops as it is the Cowboys secondary that, guys, at times has been very leaky this season. It got a lot better in the Cowboys win against Cincinnati, but that was going up against Emory Jones, and I think the level of competition is going to be much higher for Bedlam. So I'm going to go with Drake Stoops to work his way free. I think he catches a touchdown deep that is going to be a blown coverage or something. I mean, it just felt like the Cowboys have had a lot of issues in the secondary that got patched up, but I expect to see maybe one time a deep Drake Stoops touchdown.
I was sniped by you, Ben. That's who I was going to go with. And I think there's going to be a run of OU players come off the board here. And I think maybe in Bedlam, maybe that's where OU's biggest advantage is the receiving room. Because I've been impressed with what the Sooners have, and the Cowboys are injured in that front. Maybe the Sooners were better week 1 when everyone was healthy anyway. But Yeah, Ben. I'm gonna take. As I look on my board, I have a couple down here. I think I'm gonna go Nick Anderson, and maybe Eli. I'm guessing he'll catch a touchdown just because he can't stop catching touchdowns. What is up with that? 8 touchdowns? That's insane.
Going into Kansas, it was 8 touchdowns on 16 total receptions. That was an an OU record. The highest, touchdown to catch ratio in program history. It took a dip against Kansas because he didn't find the end zone uncharacteristically. But, Ben, when you mention a leaky secondary for OSU, that's where my mind goes, is to a guy who is a big play threat, home run ball guy. That's the one. If sometime in the second quarter Saturday we're looking beyond the OSU secondary and there's a receiver in Sooner colors, it's probably going to be Nick Anderson. And I think that's, when we talk again, the key to this being Oklahoma figuring out the passing game, that sounds more like what they've been doing. So I think he is a really good pick there.
That was the last pick of the third round. One more, guys. Round out your teams real quick to teams of 4. Eli, it's to you.
I'm going to stick with the wide receivers room at OU. You're right. They're deep, and we're talking about a unit that lost Angel Anthony, the Michigan transfer, who'd been so great. But to me, it's Jalil Farouk. He's a guy that could use a bounce-back game. They didn't get much going in the passing game at Kansas, and he fumbled on one of his snaps out of the backfield. They've sort of employed him at times as a pseudo running back. Point is, he's the most gifted, maybe not gifted athlete, but when you're talking about the guys in that OU receiving core, he's the one who, maybe like Deebo Samuel with the 49ers, you kind of just figure out how to get the ball in his hands and let him go. And this feels like a game where that could be a difference. If we're going to be talking a tight game, Jalil Farouk, the most talented guy in that wide receivers room, is the one I look to. And I'm sure they'll be creative in finding ways to get him the ball. That hasn't always panned out. Last week, we saw all kinds of creative attempts go nowhere for the Sooners. But if they can get him to work, Jalil Farouk's the guy to take him. So he's my guy here.
It feels like Bedlam's always a big spot for your most athletic guy. Just feels like that's the time where they make plays.
Tyreek Hill, Brennan Presley. The list goes on there.
So you think that is probably Jalil Farouk in any sort of NFL combine or just, eye test, most athletic guy? Is it Farouk or who else should OSU fans?
I mean, the eye test would say it. I know DeMarco Murray has told me before that Marcus Major is probably the most athletic guy on that roster, but Marcus Major's not healthy this week. I'm sure there's some guys on defense, but certainly when you're talking about the skill positions on offense, Jalil Farouk last year, when he wasn't the number one guy, really was their playmaker in chief. They'd get him the ball wherever he could, and he'd go make a play. He's had ups and downs this year, but he remains that guy.
Guys, we made it all the way to the 4th round before any offensive linemen were picked. And I don't know if that just says more about college football and in the stars and everything like that, but we have to give some love to the guys up front. That's why I'm going to take Dalton Cooper, the Cowboy guard. Of course, it's easy to point to Ollie Gordon as one of the reasons for all of OSU's success. That's why he was the number 1 pick in this draft. But it's really because of the offensive line, and that's not to be understated how much better the Cowboy offensive line is. In terms of run blocking, that's really where Cooper excels, but also pass blocking too. The Cowboys didn't even allow a sack last week, and I think that's going to be huge in Bedlam. So I'm going to take Dalton Cooper.
Yeah, Ben, that's a solid pick, and just another one of those guys for OSU that they're going to really need to play well on Saturday to win. That has never been a part of a Bedlam game before. Alan Bowman being one of them, Nick Martin, he redshirted last year, so there's a bunch of guys like that will get their first taste of Bedlam. That maybe it'll be the last taste too for a lot of players, but they'll need him to come up big. And I'll round out the draft with Cam Epps. Eli hinted at maybe he comes off the board a little earlier. So there he is. Mr. Irrelevant in terms of draft jargon, but anything but for the Cowboys, the defensive secondary. He's a redshirt freshman too. And but he's had 3 picks already. He's been a big player. And a lot of times it's just been maybe in the right place at the right time. Ball pops into his hands, but enough of that stuff happens, and you really got to give credit to Epps. So he's played well for a young player, and he'll be facing a big test with OU's secondary, or OU's receivers testing that secondary. But I'll be watching him. I wouldn't be surprised if he's responsible for a turnover.
I think he presents. Well, he presents turnover hungry defensive backs have kind of been, they terrorize opposing offenses for good reason. And Oklahoma, you just got to look at last week, Dylan Gabriel, the pick six that got everything started for Kansas. He's been pretty good this year. They didn't give him a lot of chances to throw last week, but he's also been prone to the occasional mistake. That might be the thing that Cameron Epps can capitalize on.
Yeah. Now we look at this draft, and I think unlike a lot of years, we see a lot of Cowboys, especially up top in this draft. Of course, the Cowboys, if you just look at last week, it'd be hard to say, they're not playing better. Guys, big picture here, how do we think this one goes?
I don't want to let recency bias influence me too much. And obviously, recency bias kind of matters in terms of it's not what you did in week one, it's what you did last week and what you did yesterday in practice and what you did the last play. But I think the Cowboys, they're playing their absolute best football right now. Part of me wonders if that crashes down to earth a little bit, as a lot of times it does in Bedlam. Bedlam just does weird things, and the Sooners, they don't lose many back-to-back games. I'm leaning OU in this one. I don't know about you guys.
I think, you're right. Recency bias is hard. It's the runaway train that has been OSU over the last 4 games, and sort of the tripping over themselves Sooners of the last couple weeks. I think it's going to be, consider where we were a month ago, how we were looking at Oklahoma State, how we were looking at Oklahoma. They've sort of met somewhere in the middle of that. And I think Oklahoma State's, I think we're in for a real treat. I think OSU is going to give the Sooners a really good battle. I don't know. I think Ollie Gordon is the X factor. If he does what he's been doing, Oklahoma's going to have a hard time winning this game. But I've got faith on the side, I guess, of the Sooners that they find a way to bounce back this week. If we're talking score predictions, I go 29-25 Sooners. But you could flip that and I'd be just as happy with the pick. I think OSU has everything it needs to win this game.
I think it's so cool that we're talking about a game like that where, we really don't know. We just think it's going to be a great competitive game. It should be a thrilling conclusion to this rivalry, at least for now. So I'm just excited that there is so much up in the air for this game. But I think with that said, I'm going to pick the Cowboys. And, just going from last week, like how could you not say that OSU is the better team right now this week? The only thing that would stop you and help you pick OU could be the history here. But I don't think the history of Bedlam really applies to all the newcomers and the fresh faces at OSU, like Alan Bowman, like Ollie Gordon, like Nick Martin. I don't think those guys are scared of anybody or anything. So I think I'm going to pick the Cowboys 35-32 because Bedlam, it's going to be high scoring. It's going to get crazy. But I'll take the Cowboys by a field goal.
Ben, you matched the total math of the score I had written down. I have OU 34-31. I do think it'll be a bit of a high-scoring game. Maybe in terms of the recent Bedlam history, that's just a regular game, high-scoring. But I think that both teams will break off a couple big plays. Maybe there's a special teams touchdown. But I guess I lean OU about a field goal. So OU 34, OSU 31.
Well, we'll see everyone this Saturday in Boone Pickens Stadium. It's going to be a great weather outside. 2:30 kick, ABC. It is really building up to be a fantastic game. And there's going to be a lot of sellouts there. So be sure to follow everything we're going to write, not only on Saturday, but all throughout this week as we look to bring you the best sports content in Oklahoma. So thanks again, Eli Lederman, for joining us. Be sure to follow all of his work. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes here, Jacquelyn Musgrove, Michael Lane, Michael Martin, all helping us produce on a very busy week. We'll see you next time on 2 on OSU.